I was very keen to bring motorsport back to Goodwood. My grandfather had really kind of given me the bug. I used to come racing when I was little with him. He'd take me around, told the story many times, take me around the pits. I'd meet all the drivers. We had a big party here. The big drivers, a lot of them stayed in the house. It was fantastic for an 8-year-old. So I'd always dreamt, when he closed it, much to my fury, I was about 12, I always dreamt that we might get it going again. So the Festival of Speed was to me like the start of that. I had no idea that it was going to end up being such an important part of it. And of course the park up to that point was used very much. My mother had these very important international dressage events. We had these big arenas in the park, which turned out to be a saving grace actually in terms of planning in the end, having those arenas there. So they were very, very helpful indeed. And of course sheep, which are still there. So a few people obviously who come to the festival every year realise that actually isn't how it looks all the time. It's actually a park and it's full of livestock and greens.
What we'd been talking about in 91, 92 was reopening the motor circuit. That was the big plan, the big ambition. That's what we really wanted to do, was get that wonderful circuit open for racing again.
And as we all know, that hit a wall of resistance. And so we wanted to see if there was something else we could do, which we'd be allowed to do, and also which would test the waters a bit and give us a feel for whether there was still enthusiasm for Goodwood and motorsport or not. So had this idea of perhaps trying to do something in front of the house on the private road. And I remember the first time that the track inspector, Derek Ungaro, he was the FIA track inspector, came down. He actually came down to look at the circuit with me and to tell me what I'd have to do in relation to the concrete barriers that were there and whether they were usable, and just give me a bit of a feel for the motor circuit. And after that, really, it was hardly on my mind at all. I just said, Derek, why don't you just come and have a look at this? I've just got a bit of an idea of an event in the park. Will you come and have a little look at it for me, see what you think? And actually, I started off at the kennels. Some of you will know that that's a whole different direction. We went from the kennels up, past the stables, and then left up the front of the house. And I remember driving Derek up then, him going, God, this looks pretty quick. I'm not sure this is going to work. So I was a bit worried, and I said, well, it's so important we try something. He said, well, is there not another? Let me have a look down here. So then I drove him down towards the park gates, and we turned around and went up from there. And, I couldn't believe it when he said, I think we could do this. I think this would work.
When we first dreamed up the Festival of Speed, we were on Adrian Hamilton's inaugural tour of the Loire. And we were in some chateau in France, in the bar, and Charles March was there with his friend Michael Pearson. And Charles said that he was thinking of running a speed hill climb in the park.
We decided that a hill climb would be the answer, because the road lends itself to a hill climb. It's got some great corners. Hasn't really got a straight, but some of it was going to be pretty quick.
We tried to talk him out of it, actually. And I said to him that if we tried to run say a championship hill climb event, it would be a lovely event, lovely people, but I could probably give him the names and addresses of every spectator, because they'd all be sort of relatives, they'd all be family members, because the crowd attraction is quite small. And I think Robert, it was, who suggested, well, why don't we do it for historic cars, and try and get together a bunch of the great cars from the past, because these are the things that are run by the people that we know, by friends. And we can pull together a bunch of those. And they turned to me and said, Doug, draw up a list.
We were very lucky at the beginning by the amount of the sheer help and the number of people who helped us really get it off the ground. And obviously there were people like Doug Nye and Robert Brooks who helped me hugely with the entry lists and getting the kind of right cars to come. But people really, I'd met John Surtees when I was a child. He raced at Goodwood. He had his first motor race ever at Goodwood. And John was hugely helpful in all the motorcycle content. So unusually too, I was very keen that the festival should incorporate cars and bikes together. And that was, again, that still doesn't happen very often at all. And John used to, if you like, put that entry list together for me and play a very big part. And there have been lots of people from those very, very early years who played a huge part in making it all happen.
And so I drew up a list, I think, initially of 100 names of drivers and 100 types of car that we'd like to see. And for me, it was like being a small boy taken into a toy shop and told, write down everything that you'd like from these shelves. And I wrote down everything that I'd love to see and that I thought like-minded enthusiasts, just like us, would also like to see.
Rob Widdows and I were invited by Mansell, actually. It came through Nigel originally, and then came from Carl and Bernie Haas, to come and join them at the Indy 500 in '93. And we thought, well, God, we're going to do this event, this little event we were trying to put on as well, in just a little bit later, in June. It was mad. We went there in May, and we had an amazing time, and actually it made me realise, it just made me really, really understand about entertainment and the fact that motor racing could just be so fabulously entertaining. So it was a really, really useful lesson. Of course, Mansell amazingly nearly won the race, but was just taken out at the end by Emerson, Ari Leyendijk. And we learned a lot. And I remember, look, I went and bought, this is the original bag, the Indy 500 gift shop, and I went and bought all this black and white stuff. This terrible hat. But I suddenly thought, wow, yeah, we've got to do something. It could all be, why don't we just go black and white? And the event's got to have a particular look and feel. And I bought all these ribbons, never did anything with them, but we just bought them for reference. And of course we did. The Fest Speed has always been black, white and silver. That little visit played a huge part. It played a huge role in shaping the Festival of Speed. It was also so clearly in our minds just a few months later.
I think it was Rob Widdows that came up with Festival of Speed. But anyway, that's what we ended up with. And it stood us in, pretty good stead ever since.
And we had to think of a title. And it wasn't a race meeting, it wasn't a championship, it was a one-off. So that I suddenly thought, Festival of Speed.
Yeah, the first year was a worrying experience, to say the least. We'd invested, for us at the time, what felt like quite a lot of money, and we got a few sponsors. The idea was that the sponsors would kind of cover the cost, and the rest would be, but that wasn't the case. I just hoped we could, we'd be able to at least cover the costs. And we had Bonhams, we had Citroën, we had Honda, and we had Aston Martin that first year. And I was very excited, obviously, and delighted to have them involved. But the challenge and the cost of putting the whole thing on had way outstripped all of that.
I think the fact that we put it on at all was something of a miracle, because we were all doing 5 or 6 jobs at once, and all the infrastructure was done by the repairs and maintenance department at Goodwood. So these are guys who normally would be doing something looking after the estate. And we had to make everything. So first of all, we didn't get much sleep for the month before the event. I don't think anyone had a day off for 2 or 3 months from memory. I know I didn't.
Well, I think our expectations were limited. First of all, as always, with any great public event in this country, you're on tenterhooks wondering what the darn weather's going to do. Are you going to be wading around in gumboots or sort of basking here in, in blazing sunshine? And
Lord March was right in there, doing all the jobs like everybody else, early mornings, late nights.
He's the finest detailed person I've ever worked with. Picky, but, you've got to be. The staff here, even then with that first meeting, were just terrific. I remember seeing the head gardener here at the time on hands and knees with a pair of scissors trimming the grass on the carriage circle.
And it rained and rained and rained in the build-up. And we actually ended up, I can remember I painted the bridge myself pretty much those days before, and everything was, it was all pretty stressful. And the rain was washing the paint off as quickly as we got it on.
But the rain and the bridge were not the biggest problems. The biggest problems turned out to be the parking and the taking of the money. And the reason for this was that we thought, the BARC told us we might get 5,000 people.
We had no idea how many people were going to come. It was all everyone came on the day, they paid on the day, and I was pretty worried no one was going to turn up. I didn't sleep much the night before, opened my bathroom windows, I've told this story many times, and man, they were just pouring in. It was just, my God, I mean, they were pouring up the cathedral walk towards the house like a stampede. And of course, by which time they'd also broken the fence down, and we were unable to collect the money properly. We had not enough tickets to give everybody. We went and bought a load of cloakroom tickets, like raffle tickets. It should just give some people something, tore them in half and gave them something as an entry. And we famously had nowhere to put the money either. So Wilfred Cass, who owns the Sculpture Park at Goodwood, who's a great entrepreneur himself, saw the problem and immediately went to his wife's wardrobe, took out all her old handbags and rushed around the car park, giving out handbags to all the car park attendants so they could just stick the money in the handbag. And then he went round with his old BMW with the boot open, just pouring the money out of the handbags into the car. So that was pretty helpful. But the fences were well, you know, the fence, we didn't have a proper fence around the site anyway, and people heard about it from all over the area and were just pouring in. So we don't really know how many were there, but we suspect about 25,000 actually came that weekend.
It's always great when you see a plan starting to work, you know, things drop into place.
Unbelievably, we had a wedding going on at the same time that first weekend, which was simply that when we picked the date, I hadn't done my due diligence, and suddenly when I asked the house team here that we were obviously going to need to use the house and presumably it was available, to my horror heard that we had a wedding taking place and that they'd already paid their deposit, nothing I could do about it much. So that didn't sound very promising at all. So I got them in, and this charming Irish family came. We had a long tea, and I generally just tried to chat them up. And at the end I said, look, by the way, this is all a bit of a worry because we got a big plan on for that weekend here at Goodwood, and perhaps you could think about moving your wedding to the weekend before or after. And we're going to hold this motorsport event. It's not going to be good for a wedding, you know. It's going to be very noisy and going to be a lot of people here, and you know, it could be the worst thing. And this guy said, right, sounds absolutely bloody marvellous to me, he said. And we couldn't get them to move it. All we'd done was make them even more keen to be here. So the Festival of Speed start line banner came down at 3:30 on Saturday afternoon, and their bus drove under the banner into the house. And I guess a few people on site thought, what on earth is going on here? This looks a bit weird, but no one really noticed. And the wedding took place in the house on Saturday, and they stayed overnight on Sunday, and actually even tried to fly Robert Brooks's Gypsy Moth, which was part of the auction, out of the park on Saturday night after one too many beers. But it was, I mean, to think now that we had a wedding going on at the same time and we just had to go with it was fairly bizarre. I was very keen to take part in the festival. Firstly, I thought it was important anyway that the kind of family was seen to be directly involved. Maybe why wouldn't I be? I mean, it's much more fun to be involved. And also, actually, it was my go-kart track as a boy. So my thing I was most passionate about was my go-kart, which I tore around those roads. I used to hide, wait for cars to arrive, then shoot out behind them. So of course I wanted to take part, and I was very, very lucky. I was offered to drive that wonderful A6 GCM Maserati of the Gonzalez Beera car. And it was quite a challenge, actually. I mean, I wasn't that experienced, and it had a centre throttle. And I remember the gear stick was right between your legs as well, so it was quite difficult. Lovely, lovely, lovely thing though. But
what was wonderful was that there was a crowd. I mean, you know, Sunday there was quite a big crowd. We had 25,000 people over a day and a half. Amazing.
Our most famous visitor probably that first year was George Harrison, who just paid his money and came. He came in his lovely rocket, Gordon Murray car. I think he came with Gordon actually. And I had no idea he was here. I saw this rocket parked outside the stables. It was just parked there randomly, and we were trying very hard to get, you know, that's what we didn't want to happen. And then discovered it was George, who was having a whale of a time, was super enthusiastic about it all. And we then organised so he'd get a run up the hill, and actually took part in quite a few of the events thereafter, and came to Goodwood a bit. And, you know, it was a real privilege to get to know him a little bit. I think a very important part of the festival from the beginning has been the quality of for me anyway, the quality of the cars and the motorcycles.
Everything was open to everybody, the paddocks, everything. And we've kept that right to this day, as you know. And to me, it's one of the strongest things about the Festival of Speed is the proximity of the competitors and the machinery to the people who pay the money.
We tried to get all the people with the most exciting cars, really, mostly from the UK, some from abroad, to come. I think only about less than 100 cars took part. And I can remember actually, you know, standing out there on that first Saturday afternoon as they all arrived, you know, directing them into the paddock and saying hello to them, and you know, literally I was greeting each car as it arrived. But wonderful to see them. I remember particularly, you know, I don't know why, but you know, all the Astons arriving and seeing the DBR1 and DB3Ss and things, thinking, oh my God, you know, these cars one dreamt about. And suddenly here they were all rolling up and very excited and good humour and just looking forward to a fun time. And I think there hadn't up to then been so many opportunities to drive these cars in a fun way with your friends, and we were lucky we managed to bring a group of people together.
My overriding memories of the entire project and the event itself is blisteringly hard work. But not only that, tremendous excitement. The adrenaline was amazing. I mean, you know, okay, you know, it wasn't heart surgery, we hadn't landed someone on the moon, but we had created a really nice motor racing event out of nothing. Of course, it couldn't have happened without Lord March, and it couldn't have happened without Goodwood House.
And then immediately afterwards, there was Charles saying, well, we got away with that. Don't know if we'll run another one. Don't know if we'll run another one. And sure enough, you know, within weeks, he was saying, we're definitely running another one. And we took off from there. Extraordinary.
One thing I've been working on for some years was to try and get Ross Brawn to bring his fabulous Grand Prix car here, which won the World Championship with Jensen in 2009. The car was laid up and obviously had never been used since. And brilliantly in 2016, Ross decided he'd bring the car.
When the opportunity arose to bring the Brawn GP car to the Festival of Speed, I must admit it was a very special moment. I think we hadn't run the car since the end of the season in any form. And I'd acquired the car when I left and wondered what I was going to do with it. And that was the first opportunity to take it out and show the world again. And for me, it was a very special car. In terms of choosing a driver for that event, there wasn't, I mean, Jensen would have obviously been a very special driver. He was driving for McLaren at the time, and I think both the time constraints and contractual issues, it was a little bit difficult. And Martin was my immediate choice. And I asked him if he'd do it, and he said yes, so that was the end of it. And I think I paid him with a case of wine.
It was a very easy answer. And the next thing is I'm having a seat fitting in a workshop very close to Silverstone Circuit. So a great privilege, slightly uncomfortable because Jensen was also there at Goodwood that year and parked up alongside me in the assembly area, looking very jealously at me. And I felt uncomfortable because I felt I was sort of cuckooing his car. He had clearly wanted to drive it but couldn't.
There was a great moment at the top where Martin and Jensen met up, and Jensen said he should climb back in the car. And it was a nice, touching moment. And to have the car here, obviously for the first time, seen again, was another Goodwood first, and just the kind of thing we aspire to be doing.
Well, it's a very iconic car, of course, with a very easily recognisable colour scheme from that amazing year for Brawn when they were using a stepping stone, really, wasn't it? From the demise of Honda to the beginning of using the Mercedes-Benz engine. Then the team became Mercedes-Benz anyway. So a lot of people wanted to see it, enjoyed seeing the car, and they remember the year. They remember Jensen, of course, taking the World Championship, and so it was a great privilege, great honour to be the one chosen to take it up and down the hill.
But I know when I arrived, I was trying to get to find out where the car was, and I saw this huge crowd around one of the marquees and realised that was for us. You know, the fans were there, and I had to fight my way through to get into the marquee to see the car. Whenever Martin and I went out into that area, the response from the fans was very special, and we could have signed autographs all day. I think the public's imagination was captured because of the fairy story that was Brawn GP, and I think you know, from the ashes rose a phoenix, which was a team that went on to win the World Championships, and the only team in the history of Formula 1 with a 100% record. I think it was the despair when the team was being closed, and the fact that was all very public, and the fact we managed to keep it alive, and then even more than that, we went on to win the World Championships.
And they explained to me, and it had a lot of Mercedes engineers working on a different group each day, actually, because I think they all wanted to come along and be part of running that car again. The car looked exquisite. It just was so beautifully put together and finished. But it was explained to me when I first got in it, there is absolutely one of everything available for that car. So if burnouts are out of the question, or donuts or anything like that, I had to treat it with great respect on the 6 runs that I was going to do with the car over the weekend. And that included even going down to the bottom of the hill where you have to spin them around ready to take the start, to queue up there at the start. I was doing, 3-point turns with the help of the marshals, and some of the fans that like to get down there were like, goading me to spin it around, and I'm thinking, if only you knew what I know, I can't do this. So I was 3-point turning it and just treating it with like a road car that that was brand new, that I didn't want to take any energy out of. I think the last run was my favourite. The track starts getting a little bit muddy here and there as people get cheeky on the, against the grass, or running a bit wide, or they're stunt driving or whatever. And it gets very bumpy towards the top of the hill. So an F1 car that's not especially set up, and with a raised ride height, for example, can start moving around quite a lot. So you have to, and hitting the ground quite hard towards the end of the climb. You just get a bit more confident and understand it, believe that the brakes will actually work from cold and that the tyres will grip, and just start letting the car go a little bit.
But as I say, I think the car and the story and the whole thing captured the fans' imagination, and I think Martin driving it was very special as well. He's extremely popular. It was a real honour for me to have been part of it. Just to revisit a little bit on that day in Goodwood was very special.
The next great American moment, big American moment, was in 2006 when Richard Petty came and had the King here, and the man himself, he behaved like the King all weekend. The fans, thrilled the fans, massively entertaining.
I heard it from, I think, Junior Johnson and Darrell Waltrip. They went over maybe a couple of years before I went, and they said it was great. I needed to go, and then little March called me one day. In fact, he had called me 3 or 4 times, and I just didn't think too much about it, didn't have time to mess with it. And, once I retired, then I had a little bit of time to be able to go. They raced up the driveway, and I imagine the driveway was different than what it was. Once we got there, it was all open deal, and it was a lot more impressive, basically, than what I thought it would be, to see that much stuff going on in one place. And, from the first time to the last time we went, it's probably doubled from what it was. I think 206, I think, was when we was over there the first time. So it's just really changed. It got bigger and better.
A very important part of the event from the very beginning, one of the main sort of thrust of the whole thing. One of the biggest challenges for us has been to try and put the original drivers back to the original cars. Ideally, you know, in the right suit, wearing the right helmet. It brings back big, big memories. And so that's always been something that we've tried to achieve. And that was a great year for it when we had Petty here in the original car.
Yeah, it was great bringing the Superbird because there's so many people seen pictures of it that had never really actually seen a Superbird. And the Superbird race car, a little bit different, but still yet they could see what everybody was talking about with the wing and the nose. And it, even though it was a big old car, it looked like a race car. So it was great to take it over there. It was quite impressive to, you know, to go and see people. A lot of people would come by with souvenirs or different T-shirts or stuff that they had bought online and just waiting for me to sign it. So it was great from that standpoint.
Dan Gurney is absolutely one of my biggest heroes. Daniel Sexton Gurney, he was the quickest of the quick and the bravest of the brave. He seemed to be the kind of archetypal cool driver when I was a child. And actually, I mean, he still is, and he's become a great friend. But that first year that Dan and Evie came, now remember they arrived and they were very, very jet lagged. So we sort of, I'm not even sure I was here when they arrived actually. We sort of put them to bed anyway. And they started to get sort of meals sent through the letterbox in their rooms pretty much. And I was worried we were never going to see them actually, because they didn't appear for quite a while. But eventually they got over the jet lag and boy, when Dan appeared. I mean, he's a larger-than-life character. And the Eagle was here, which is my all-time favourite F1 car, most gorgeous thing.
When I drew up the original listing in '92 for the first festival, '93, very near the top of the drivers list was Dan Gurney, the great American driver. And very near the top of the car list was his Eagle Westlake, which by some way was the finest looking 3-litre Grand Prix car that anybody had produced.
And there was a great moment where it wasn't running quite right. Just didn't seem to be quite spot on for him. And he suddenly got all these spanners out, and there he was, you could see him with his spanner out stuck right inside the engine, having a sort of fiddle with them all. There's some lovely pictures of that.
In 1997, it was the anniversary of his winning both the Race of Champions non-championship race at Brands Hatch and then the Belgian Grand Prix World Championship round in that car. I've always got on well with Dan, and he was just a delight. And one of the great things about Dan Gurney was that he was the quiet American. You know, I mean, he exemplified, actually, all that's best about America. That was recognised in 1966-67 by the BRSCC marshals at Brands Hatch. And taking a leaf out of the Targa Florio sports car race in Sicily, they painted Viva Gurney on the circuit at Brands Hatch. So when Dan was confirmed as coming to the Festival of Speed, I got the boys here to paint Viva Gurney on the hill. He'd said to me, so what's the deal here, Doug? What do we do, you know, this hill climb? And I said, look, you know, please don't risk the car and don't risk yourself, because it's running on old tyres, it's been standing on in the museum for donkey's years. You know, and our crowd will be perfectly delighted if you just drive up, you know, grandma the car up waving to the crowd. And he said, yeah, okay, you got it. And he went down to the start, you know, and he was sitting in the car at the start, and we'd gone down with him. And he turned round and sort of gave us a thumbs up, you know, and I thought, this is okay. And then the light turned green, and he disappeared in a cloud of smoke. He took off as if the hounds of hell were after him, you know, because he'd never got racer out of his soul. You know, he'd retired way ahead of, his time. And he went hurtling up the hill like you couldn't believe, you know, with the thing screaming up to peak, bam, you know, and through the gears, and it was just wonderful, glorious sight.
Well, that first year was a real treat, and of course he came for the first revival as well. And actually he gave me this, he and Evie gave me this great cushion, which is very, very Dan indeed, and I think a great truism. Dan was always a super keen motorcyclist himself. He designed that extraordinary Alligator motorcycle which he brought to Goodwood Road, and he drove many of his other race cars, the great Toyotas and things were here too. And he's been a huge supporter of Festival of Speed Revival. We did that great moment at Revival with Dan Gurney for president. And most recently he gave me his Harley Davidson, the AAR prepared Harley Davidson, which arrived in a crate from California, and it was just a gift from Dan. So he's become a big part of our lives.
When he came back down, there was one thing that he kept on saying. He said, throttle was sticking on the way up, but he said, hey, you know, you guys, he said, you know, I saw the Viva Gurney painted on the hill. And even though he was zooming over it, it was 110 miles an hour or whatever, you know, he'd still registered it. Dan was brilliant, you know, just absolute superstar in the 60s. And the perfect gentleman, a really good bloke.
Another absolutely wonderful pre-war car we've shown for the first time since it was rebuilt at the Festival of Speed was the S76 Fiat, the great beast of Turin. And obviously everyone who's seen it just goes mad for it. It's such a wonderful thing, spitting flames out of it. Sounds like a kind of load of gravel being poured into a cement mixer or something. It's an incredible thing.
My father gave me a book when I was very young, and one of the most striking cars in the book was the S76, Beast of Turin. And it just, I was 7 years old at the time, and I think it just stayed with me, that image of this ridiculous car. And it's something about that era, the last of the really big engine cars, that time when they thought to go fast you put a big engine in, and this is the silliest, biggest engine car of the lot. I've been humbled by the response we've had to the car, even people who don't like cars like it. And I was delighted to get an invitation to come to the Festival of Speed, I think in 2014, and we worked through the night, 3 or 4 times through the night to try and get it running in time for that event, and we couldn't. So it was very nice for the Duke to invite us back the following year to run it for the first time. So 2015 was really important and very special because it was the first time the car had run anywhere publicly for over 100 years. So it was a particularly special Festival of Speed for me, and we drove down on the road as I tried to do as much as possible. And so the whole thing was the first proper road trip. It was the first Festival of Speed where it was running, and the reaction from everybody was very humbling. The surprising thing for me about the Beast of Turin is that it appeals to people who don't even like cars. And that you get a real feel for that when you're driving on the road. The one thing that Goodwood has done, I think, which is very special, is the last 25 years, they've managed to make the historic car world a moving world. Seeing this car in a museum, I think most people, 50% of the people would walk past it going, oh yes, that's very interesting, that's a nice interesting red Fiat. If you drive this car, and that's what Goodwood have done, they've made these cars come alive. The cars come out of museums to come to the Festival of Speed, and they're driven. As soon as they're running, everybody's reaction is one of shock, horror, awe, amusement, a combination of all those things. And that love and passion, I think, translates to people who wouldn't ordinarily be interested in cars, but love the spectacle, the noise and the smell and the atmosphere that comes along with cars like this when they're running.
And Duncan Pittaway's done a wonderful job to get that, get the engine back, get the engine from Fiat, find the chassis. I think the Effect chassis still had the brakes attached to it, so it did have some original bits and pieces still attached to it. And then obviously to get it going, and he drives it so well. I've been up the hill with him a couple of times in it now, and I mean, it's a pretty hairy experience. I mean, you have to sit to one side because the the flames, you're on the side of the exhaust pipe, the flames come whistling down past your ear and set fire to your hair if you're not careful.
You would imagine that Duke gets an opportunity to ride in the grooviest cars in the world. What was so, again, humbling and so delightful is when I spoke to him after the drive, and also to some of his colleagues, you got a genuine feeling that he really loved the car and really loved the experience. And I wasn't sure whether it was something he goes in every car, but I've subsequently found out that he very much likes this car. I was absolutely delighted that the Duke loved his ride in the Fiat.
And then, of course, the next year, Duncan drove it all the way from Bristol on the M4. You can imagine that thing coming up behind you. You must have thought you're going to be kind of gobbled up by it. I think it cruises along quite happily at 80 or something. I mean, it's just amazing. And he drives it like a demon.
You get nothing but love and amusement and smiles and laughter from everybody when you drive down the road in something like this. And I think the spectacle of seeing cars being driven and the opportunity of seeing the best cars in the world being driven is something that Goodwood have provided to the whole of the classic car movement. And to be invited to be part of that is amazing.
"1996 was the first year Ferrari came with the F1 team to the Festival of Speed. Eddie Irvine was the driver, and of course it was a fantastic moment for all of us when Luca de Montezemolo said the team could come and would come, and they were absolutely enthusiastic to support it in the best way they possibly could.
And I remember Charles's excitement. He actually telephoned me, which he rarely did, to say, "Doug, we've just got the go-ahead from Luca de Montezemolo, and Ferrari are coming." Oh, wow, big deal.
And then the morning they turned up, was just had to pinch yourself,
Ferrari sent their test team with the car. And the guys came over really thinking, well, this is a complete piece of cake, because essentially, they didn't have any work to do. All they had to do was to put fuel in here, oil in there, water in there, and put a starter up the thing's tail. The driver would go like that, the engine would start, and 1 mile up the hill, finito. Wonderful.
And they were in brilliant form, and they were picking up children from the crowd and popping them in the car, just making it a great, great experience for everybody. So ever since then, Ferrari come every year. Many of the team are the same guys come, and it's been wonderful to have them so closely and emotionally caught up with it all.
It was a very popular trip for the mechanics. I think because of the history of Ferrari, we always had a lot of support for customer cars, the older cars. And so we had crews of mechanics who wouldn't be frontline Formula One anymore because they didn't want to travel so much, whatever, but they looked after historic cars. And there was always a bit of a fight to decide who was going to go to the festival, because they all wanted to go. They all enjoyed it. They all felt very much a part of it. They were all made very welcome. And so it was a great trip for everybody, and one that was a very cherished trip, and everybody wanted to go. And I don't know if we held a ballot, but certainly we had to sort out amongst a large number of the mechanics and technicians who wanted to go to the festival, because it was such a special event.
And on the morning of the event, I think after the Saturday night, nowhere to be seen. They'd vanished. And I think it was the estate manager at the time who finally found them still in a nightclub in Littlehampton, where they'd gone after the party. And that was just brilliant, just wonderful. And there was just something so Italian about it.
Eddie came in the 95 car, the wonderful 412T, the 12-cylinder. Wonderful, wonderful thing. They're having trouble, I think, then with drive shafts breaking. So Eddie, of course, revved the thing up to like 14,000, dropped the clutch on Sunday morning and broke the drive shaft straight away. So I think everyone was pretty upset about that. But looking back on it, hey, it was just, I guess it was just one of those things. It was great to have Eddie here. He was in blinding form.
But really, it was the ultimate seal of approval. And we really thought then that, you know, hey, you know, we're established. This is it, we're up and running.
I mean, it's sensational every year. I mean, you go in there, and you know, your memories have subsided a little bit from the previous year, and you go back there and you realise how special an event it is.
The reception that they received, again from our wonderful crowd, just made it worthwhile. It just made it so worthwhile. And the really nice thing, talking to their lads at the end of the meeting while they were packing all their stuff away, they were saying what fantastic reception they'd had, how friendly everybody had been, and they wanted to put their names down to come back the following year. They really wanted to be part of it if there was going to be a return trip. And there was, again and again and again.
Having a silver arrow at the Festival of Speed was obviously something very, very high on our wish list. And actually, second year, 94, we managed to persuade Mercedes-Benz to send the W125, which was the most powerful Grand Prix car in history, amazingly, until the 1980s. So to have that thing here was really a big step forward, and it was fantastic for everyone to actually see it moving and see it running here at Goodwood, and to have a silver arrow here. And then, of course, we then focused really hard on getting other silver arrows.
I remember Charles and I going to Stuttgart to the Mercedes-Benz Museum at one point, and just walking around their exhibits and looking at all these utterly priceless silver arrow Grand Prix cars, you know, with our jaws dragging on the ground. And it was a question of which ones would run, which ones Mercedes-Benz were willing to run. Then there were some niceties, I remember, of were they perfectly happy to run if Audi brought auto unions as well, you know, because obviously there are commercial rivalries involved these days, which were in 1937, 38, 39, actual sporting rivalries on track as well.
One of the most exciting things for us in those early years of putting the Festival of Speed together was trying to find the cars, or it was such a challenge to try and get the cars we wanted to come, persuade the owners to bring them, and often to actually just, you know, find out where the car was at all, and then to get it to actually come and take part on the hill. And one of those breakthroughs was with Mercedes-Benz, when Max von Pine agreed that they would get the W165 going again and bring it. They brought it to the Festival of Speed.
In 1994, it started with this car here, the W125, Mercedes-Benz Silver Arrow, and it was John Surtees running it up the hill. And we had a second car there in 1994, the post-war 1955 W196, which was driven by Sterling Moss originally in 55 and as well in 94 in Goodwood. In 1937, it was Rudolf Caracciola winning the European Championship with this car. And in 1994, in Goodwood, John Surtees won his class, was the fastest in his class, in the Titans class in Goodwood. And I think that's the best expression talking about the Goodwood Festival of Speed, the Titans of motorsports, both the race cars and the race drivers. And you can get as close as possible to both the drivers and the race cars, and that's probably the really exciting thing for all the visitors that come to Goodwood.
And it was a fantastic moment. This car hadn't run since 1939 at the Grand Prix, at the Tripoli Grand Prix, and of course it only ran once. The Mercedes-Benz turned up, took it out of the box. No one had ever seen it before. It absolutely thrashed everybody, and it went away again, was never seen again. So to have that car run again for the very first time since 1939 here, and but fantastic to have it here. And it was those sort of breakthroughs in many ways that I remember really kept us going. We had so many fantastic, you know, there's so much excitement about trying to persuade a car or an owner to come and bring something which nobody had seen for forever, really. So those were highlights for me. 97 was another very big year for the Silver Arrows at Goodwood. In fact, it was the first year we had an auto union taking part. And since the very beginning, I remember talking to Doug Nye about it, you know, almost before we started, how were we going to find an auto union? There were none in captivity. They'd all been lost during the war. They were all hidden in Russia and East Germany, and slowly they've started to appear. But we were speaking to people, you know, East German things, people who had them, people who'd hidden them, people who'd smuggled them out, about where we could find one, how we could get hold of them. So it was actually a very exciting time trying to track one down until, of course, we eventually got the Riga car. I remember ringing this guy in East Germany called Karasik, who owned one, and who allegedly got it working. And we tried to persuade him to come. He wouldn't bring it. Then I think there was this great swap with the Riga car in East Germany, where they had the original car in the museum, and Audi managed to get that car out of them. And the Riga car was here, and of course we had the famous hill climb car with the double wheels, which Stuck drove, looking just like his dad in the white helmet. And that was a big moment. But to actually get an auto union here after all those years, so from 93 to 97 we were on it all the time, trying to find one. It was like the Holy Grail in some ways.
And to hear a running supercharged 16-cylinder auto union was a real big deal, you know, and a big, lazy, slow revving V16, which could lap Monaco, incidentally, in one gear without changing gear. It had so much torque. The straight 8 supercharged Mercedes with a real racing engine, real hard, absolute chest-thumping noise it made, and the smell of the boot polish exhaust, you know, from the highly laced fuels that they used. And to see all that stuff and to breathe in the exhaust fumes in the paddock, you know, with your eyes watering, to see and hear those cars running was extraordinary. The success of the event has really been driven by that.
Perhaps my ultimate experience of Silver Arrows at Goodwood was actually being allowed to drive one, which I have to say was really unbelievable, going up through the wall. You know, the number one thing is not wanting to be a complete idiot. So there's a fine balance between going so slowly you look a bit of an idiot, or crashing and looking a complete idiot. So no, it is really exciting. And in the Streamliner in 2014 was, I mean, it's absolutely one of my favourite cars anyway to look at. And to be sitting in that thing, obviously it's open, sitting down the start line with it sort of roaring away, it's a beast. And then to drive it up the hill was certainly one of the highlights for me. One of the most important things that happened very early on, in fact in '94, we were so lucky the second year, was to get a current Formula One team here with a current car. And Ron Dennis brilliantly sent the McLaren Peugeot for Martin Brundle to drive. And Frank sent the Williams, the 6-wheel Williams. And we also had BMW and the Mark Surer Formula 2 car. So these were three hugely competitive drivers in very competitive cars, and Jonathan Palmer was in the Williams, and I think Jonathan came out on top. But to see the McLaren going, I mean, they were all going at it absolutely full tilt. They were absolutely 100 seconds away from each other, and it was a pretty startling experience. And I think that played a big part in the sort of success of the event early on.
Driving flat out in the McLaren in '94 is one of the craziest things I've ever done in a racing car, because the chances of smashing the car up, smashing yourself up, hitting a tree, whatever, was very high, because it was literally the front drive to the house. Narrow, slippery, bumpy, not at all what a Formula One car is designed to do, but we had a go. And people still do give it plenty up the hill, but we, as you said, we were very much encouraged to go flat out back in those days. We really set the car up with blankets and wings and short gear ratios. We set it up to be fastest up the hill, and I drove it as hard as I could. Utter madness, because the chances of wiping that out on a flint wall were pretty high.
As well as having the McLaren here, we had Arrows too, which was obviously important. And a good story about that, and indeed about Ron, was, and a huge moment for me, that second year was to see the McLaren truck turning up, because that was a proper F1 truck. It was practically the size of the paddock. And it rolled in all super shiny. And in fact, the guy then spent the rest of the day cleaning it as well and parking it all perfectly, all the wheel nuts lined up, everything was perfect. And then I got a call from one of the event managers saying McLaren were going. And the truck driver just said he had orders from Mr. Dennis to go back to Woking. So I thought, that just can't be true. So I went and talked to him. He said, yeah, no, he was going to go. And so I rang Ron up, and didn't know him at all well at this point. Rang Ron up and said, you know, I'm very sorry, what's the problem? And he said, oh, I hear I'm next to the lavatories. My truck's next to the lavatories, I want it moved. So I said, well, it's really difficult, the plan's the plan, and you know, everyone's in place, and I can't, you know, it's hard, I can't move the Arrows truck very easily, but you know, and he said, well, Arrows have never won a race, so I think you can certainly move it. Anyway, I think actually I can't remember what happened, I think we probably did move it in the end, but anyway, Ron capitulated, but Ron stayed, which was great, and we all got to know each other very well that first weekend, and you know, as they say, the rest is history. In 1998, we had some of the greatest American drivers of all time, thanks to Nick Guzet and Penske. So Andretti came, Rick Mears came, Bobby Rahal came, and tragically, it was a very, very wet weekend. Annoyingly, it wasn't the greatest way to show the cars off, but they were in fine form.
I had never been to Goodwood, certainly knew of it, you know, from a historical standpoint, but I'd never been there. You know, I think when the invitation came, and it came from, I think, a couple IndyCar drivers like myself, when the invitation came, and, you know, I never needed too much push to come to England anyway, having lived there. So when the invitation came, it certainly very attractive to me. It didn't take long for me to say, yes, I'd love to come. Of course, I've known a number of drivers from over the years, European drivers, English drivers from over the years. So, you know, to have all those people, and then many I didn't know, but to have a lot of people I did know at the same place, same time, it was like a big reunion and a lot of fun. And of course, you know, I never took too seriously how fast I could go up the hill, because I figured that wasn't, maybe if I was a much younger man, I would have tried to do that. But at my age, I thought discretion should play the better part of valor, and you know, and just do a nice demonstration for all the great English fans that come to the event. Mario is probably one of the most popular drivers in the history of the sport. You know, Rick was a great competitor of mine, a fellow I mean, I had and have tremendous respect for both of them anyway. So for the three of us to come over there and represent IndyCar racing was very special.
And because of the weather, their wives didn't venture out much. And we had always have a big jigsaw in the large library. And they spent most of the weekend doing the jigsaw. And on the Saturday evening, just before the party, they were about to finish it. They were all very excited. And the last piece was missing. And they were all rather distraught. Anyway, everyone forgot about it. And in the morning, it was pouring with rain again, so they were all in the large library waiting around, and Mario walks in and says, oh, gee, the puzzle, oh, right, yeah, and pops in the final piece in true competitive racing driver fashion, which of course he'd stolen early on. But it was great having them all here, and actually we made a puzzle, or they made a puzzle very brilliantly, of a picture of them all standing out on the library steps, so we then got a very fun, huge puzzle of all of them.
And it's always fun, very flattering when people, you know, thank you, you know, for the joy you gave them or what have you, the entertainment that you gave them. And you know, of course, I drove my '86 winning car up the hill one time, and that was a thrill, and drove others, an old an old Cummins diesel-powered monstrosity. It was fun to, and of course, years earlier, in 2001, I'd driven the XJ13 Jaguar up the hill when I was running Jaguar Formula One. Of course, spent time there. Really fortunate to participate on several occasions and to drive really interesting, historic, fabulous racing cars.
In 2002, the fastest time up the hill was Rod Millen in the Toyota Celica. To see Rod attacking the Festival of Speed in the way he did, I think took us all pretty much by surprise. It was an incredible display of absolute talent and control and being completely on the edge. I mean, hearing the turbo, hearing the wastegate going on the turbo as he went up, the sort of screeching, was a whole new sound, something we hadn't really ever heard before.
You know, the first year I went to Goodwood was 2002, and I took the Pikes Peak Celica, the car that I set the world record at the Pikes Peak Hill Climb when it was a gravel course. It was a dirt car. You know, Pikes Peak in those days was all gravel the whole way to the top. And of course, you know, with Goodwood being an all paved surface, the car was quite loose and quite different, but the speeds were very similar. That time I took the Tacoma to Goodwood was certainly different. You know, that vehicle was faster than the Celica, and the only thing I didn't do, I didn't put it on the correct tires, you know, pavement correct tires. It was still on the dirt tires, so the traction wasn't so great, and it was a little loose all the way up the hill.
Rod's been a number of times to the event, obviously, and it's great. He's always so entertaining, and great that he's coming back this year again with the Celica to just remind us all what it was like to see him that first time. Perhaps our most famous moment with Dougie was in 2008 when he did the run through the house, and we were trying to think of something exciting to do to get some attention, really, for the festival. And it was one of those ideas which we had no idea how kind of good or bad it was going to be until we did it. And of course, Dougie, well, he made a fantastic job of it.
Marsh's idea to ride around this house. I would imagine that if you approach somebody to ride around the house like that, it'd be a swift no, but no, on this occasion, it was all his idea. And yeah, we rode through pretty much every room in the house, including the staircase, up and down in the private quarters, and then through where all the furniture is and everything, up into the, let's say, the attic of the house, and then out onto the balcony, and we had to modify the stairs a little bit so that I could ride up onto the roof, which was quite challenging. Greeted by the butler with a glass of champagne on top, in true Goodwood fashion.
Glass of champagne, sir?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Quite a surreal moment when I was coming down the staircase to surprise the guests at the private dinner one time, and at the bottom of the staircase was Sir Sterling Moss. So that was something, you know, quite incredible that he just watched me come down the staircase and just gave me a pat on the back as I went past. So it's a nice memory. Good shit.
He's become a great part of it. He's been at the party lots of times doing wild things. And famously too, we had a press launch one year in the ballroom where we had about 72 people on one table all the way down the ballroom. And unbeknown to the guests, we created all the glassware down the middle of the table, the jugs and the decanters and everything in sugar. So they looked like they were glass, and glass plates with fruit and everything. And suddenly, in the middle of dinner, this mad motorcyclist appears through the ballroom doors, jumps onto the end of the table and just smashes his way down the middle of the table, breaking everything, and then disappears at the other end. That was something for them all to remember. So Dougie, he hasn't done anything for a while actually. It's probably time for him to do something again. We've got some plans, being the 25th anniversary at the party, for Dougie to do something this year, but it's time he did something again for sure. And he's become a, you know, he's a huge part of it, and there's a great, you know, wonderful, wonderful person, lovely to deal with. I remember it was, I think, one of the, well, actually when we were doing the rehearsal for the for when he rode through the house, we had this little noise going on in the background, and there was his little son, who was tiny then, he was only about 2 or 3, riding his bike crazily up and down the road outside. So, you know, these Lampkins, they certainly start young. Ferrari have always been very, very involved with Goodwood and the festival, and that's been a real joy for me. It's been absolutely fantastic, and of course we celebrated their 50th anniversary in 1997, and that was our very first sort of proper display in front of the house, when we hung the Formula One kind of great Italian arch with the horses on the top, and we had a sort of water garden around the bottom. Jerry Judy did that one too. And I remember ringing Jerry actually from Monaco. I was racing the very first Monaco Historics that year, and we'd left it very late, so it was May, and we hadn't actually got it sorted out, so we had no time. And it only suddenly occurred to me that we should be doing something very different. And I had an idea for this arch, and Jerry was a very good model maker I knew, and he was particularly clever with polystyrene in those days. And so we created this whole arch out of polystyrene. It looks very small now compared with the others, but amazing to think that we've celebrated 50, 60, and of course 70 years of Ferrari last year, when we had the great moment and the great music in front of the house and all the cars around the turning circle. So Ferrari played a very, very meaningful part in the whole event over 25 years, and have been involved from the very beginning. In fact, in 1997, it was that terrible wet year. It was the wettest year we've ever had. When I looked out from the house afterwards, I couldn't see the road. It was all just mud. It was terrible. I was really upset about it, actually. My father was very, very amazing and very reassuring, and said, "Don't worry, I've seen it like this before. The park always recovers. It'll be fine." And sure enough, it did recover, but it was pretty bad. And I can remember talking to Chris Amon, who we managed to get over from New Zealand. He only ever came that once, and we're so pleased he did come. It was the first time he got back into a Ferrari Grand Prix car since he'd walked away from it all those years before. And I can remember the tub of his car had about sort of 5 inches of water in it, because it was just so wet and miserable. But he put on a fantastic show, as did everyone else, and it was actually one of those great years, and one we'll always remember. Dennis Jenkinson, the famous motoring journalist, wrote a piece about the Festival of Speed that very first year. And we'd always been really keen from the very beginning to have 722, the great 300 SLR here, ideally with Moss and him driving it. And in '95, of course, it was the big anniversary of that incredible Mille win in 55, perhaps Sterling's greatest ever race.
When you're a kid and you first get interested in motor racing, there might just be 1 or 2 great events, you know, that really grab you here. And you think, wow, that's fantastic. In 1955, I was 10 years old at the time, and I remember being told or seeing or hearing that the British pair, Sterling Moss and Dennis Jenkinson, had just won the Mille Miglia in a factory Mercedes-Benz. And it was such a big deal. You know, it was 1,000 miles non-stop round Italy. And then we got to 1995 and the anniversary of the great Mille Miglia win. And Jenks wasn't terribly well. He was in quite frail health by then. But our mutual friend Alan Henry, who rode on Formula One for so many years, said that he'd bring Jenks down to Goodwood and look after him and so on, and that was great. And I was here. Mercedes-Benz provided the car, 722.
This is the original winning car of the 1955 Mille Miglia, the Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR, and inside sitting was Sterling Moss and Dennis Jenkinson. And that happened again at the Festival of Speed in Goodwood in 1995. And I'm sure that was absolutely exciting to everybody who was there to see the original pair in the original car.
Sterling, would you believe, had broken his leg. So he had a leg in plaster, and the only way in which we could get him into the cockpit of the Mille Miglia winning Mercedes was to sort of prop him up on a cushion on top of the driver's seat. So you had Sterling sort of sitting, towering up out of the car with his leg as straight as it could be in its plaster cast. And there's Sterling up here, there's little Jenks sunk, almost submarine down beside him.
And Jenks was here with his little loo roll, which Mercedes wanted so badly, and were prepared to pay anything for, and he never let them have it. Which of course he'd written, acted as a scroll, a moving map, the world's first moving map.
And when they took off from the line, I remember it was gorgeous, absolutely wonderfully sunny day. And you had that silver car with the red 722 number on the side, which corresponded to 7:22 in the morning, which was their start time. And they took off from the Goodwood start line and just drove up waving to the crowd, really.
To see him and Moss drive up the hill together was a pretty emotional moment. And again, grown men were crying. And a lot of people were crying, especially when they came back into the paddock. Everyone, there's some wonderful pictures of everyone standing around the car. It's like it really is a big moment. And we lifted Jenks. He was too frail to even come out of the car, and so kind of emotionally caught up in the whole experience. We picked him up out of the body of the SLR and brought him actually in here, and he lay on this very sofa for a while, kind of recovering from the whole experience. But that was certainly one of the very big memories.
But the sight of silver car, red numbers, Sterling and Jenks, the gold-coloured straw bales, green grass, the crowd, and Goodwood House in the background, this brilliant, dazzling Goodwood sunshine on it. Magic.
In those early years, the whole F1 moment at the festival was a pretty exciting one. Of course, it still is, and it's a huge part of the event, but it's definitely different. And Nick's fantastic run, you know, his 41.6 record, in some ways was a fantastic moment, but in some ways it kind of burst the bubble. McLaren have always been a huge part of Festival of Speed, and it's been brilliant for me to be so close to them. And 1999, Ron and the team decided they were going to go for the record. And they were in an unusual position, I think, because Nick Heidfeld was the test driver. And Nick was so young and didn't have a huge amount, I think it was a huge amount for him to do at McLaren. Or anyway, Goodwood became a bit of a project for him. He came probably for 3 years on the trot. Nick obviously felt very up for it. And I think McLaren, well, I know for sure that a few team principals made it very clear to Nick he needed to do the business, which may not have been the most responsible thing to have said, but anyway, that he, if he was going to go up, he better not come back with without it.
It should be quicker than last year, but it's not most important here to be quick and set quickest time. It's more important to bring the car up there without crashing, because otherwise it would be bad for me and bad for the whole event. So we'll see what I can do.
In their normal style, I think McLaren even built a special gearbox for him, sitting there, car jacked up, lights go green, all the wheels go on. Whoa!
I have very special memories of that day in Goodwood. Not only because of the day itself, but also because of what happened and still happens afterwards. Still, to this day, I have so many fans coming up to me, not only in the UK, but I'm sure even here in Zurich over the weekend there will be some people coming and saying, I was there back in '99, on that day I watched it live, and if I see it now on TV it looks a bit crazy. It didn't feel that mad from inside the car.
The hill was quite dusty again, quite mucky. The underwing surfaces on the McLaren accelerated the airflow anyway. When he went through the bridge at 115 miles an hour or whatever it was, or 125 or 195, whatever it was, I don't know, but he was visibly going like hell.
And it was electrifying. You knew the moment you heard those revs that something was going on. I mean, the car was hitting the rev limit through every gear. He was absolutely screaming, and the whole place kind of went quiet.
And even though it looks super quick for spectators out there, there was still quite some margin. Especially, as I said, because it was wet all the time before, so I couldn't really look for the last couple of time that was left.
The sound of it was fantastic, and then we could, as he disappeared out of sight round Moulcombe, you know, we're all looking at the screens to see how he's doing on the rest of it. But you could hear the wail of the engine coming up over the woods, all the way up.
I was at the top actually when we jumped out of the car, and it was well, it was very, very exciting and emotional. But Nick was, you know, pretty calm, German driver, and he'd just done 160 through the top corner, which was pretty eye-watering. When I asked him, you know, how he'd gone and had he really pushed it to the very limit, and was that it? He said, "Oh no, I had a little bit more." He wasn't on the edge; had a bit more to give. It was an exciting moment, that's for sure. One we'll never ever forget. 'Honda, of course, have always played a fantastically supportive role at Goodwood. In fact, they were one of our very first sponsors, partners in '93, in year one. And it was shortly after that I persuaded Sir Nobuhiko Kawamoto, who was the chairman of Honda, to come up in Trevithick's great steam carriage that we had here, which I think was the very first vehicle, man-made vehicle, to be self-propelled, and was built by this great Cornishman to get himself to the pub and back. And it is an unbelievable thing, and we had a wonderful reproduction of it here, and it's been here quite a few times. And Sir Nobuhiko went in it, and he loved it. I mean, he became so excited, and it was not long after that we got the collection hall to come in '99 to bring so many of the great Honda racing cars all the way from Japan. Of course, we had Surtees here in the RA300, which was a very memorable moment for me. I'd always loved that car as a child, built lots of models of it, and the bikes as well. the six-cylinder Hondas.
Last year, I came here and met Lord March. We talked about such a wonderful festival, and happened to be last year was the 50th anniversary of our company. So the old machines of the past is now under restoration, and we talked about that. And Lord March asked me that you should bring those.
And so, a week before the festival, a stunning array of cars and motorbikes was being warmed up at the UK headquarters in London. Estimated value somewhere between 30 and 50 million pounds. A collection accompanied by a team of 27 mechanics.
There's one for every car and bike, but really I could do with some more for the cars. It took a long time to restore these machines, and to keep them in good condition, it's essential we maintain them and run them. We make sure that they're tested on our circuit in Japan every 3 months.
And to see them all being fired up in the morning, they had a fantastic position in the paddock, their red carpet and the great red discs behind and all the white cars. And then all the bikes, and their mechanics would just sit there in the morning, they'd fire all the bikes up together. You'd see a whole crowd of people just standing there, just kind of, they were just drinking this noise in through their ears. It was absolutely amazing. It was a big, big moment, and we're delighted that the Collection Hall are going to be coming again this year to help us celebrate the 25th anniversary. In 2011, we celebrated 100 years of the Indy 500, and just seeing actually all those cars lined up on the way to the start line, we did a sort of static moment on the straight in front of the house with them all there, and they stretched from, like, pretty much from the crossroads right back up to the bridge, and it looked absolutely incredible.
Thank you very much. A great time here. Looking forward to
We had a great lineup of drivers, masses of help from the museum. We had Al Unser Jr., Johnny Rutherford, Danny Sullivan, Emerson, who's been so many times, such a great supporter, Bobby Rahal, Dario Franchitti, Scott Dixon, Castro Neves, Gilles de Ferran. It was a wonderful lineup and very emotional, I think, for everyone to sit there and see them on the start line. I drove the Lotus Turbine, actually, which was probably one of my more frightening moments on the hill, as it's, I was just told under no circumstances to hit the red button, and then managed to hit the red button with my back of my hand, which was fairly stupid. But I didn't hit the green button, luckily, which is the booster button, which is the one you want the one you have to bang when you want another 500 horsepower or something. You're already doing 220. I just couldn't believe that they nearly won the 500 with it. I mean, just to imagine driving that round constantly at that speed for that amount of time must be absolutely incredible. And of course, it's spooling up all the time. You actually have to put your foot on the brakes to stop it going forward. If you take your foot off the brake, it just goes. So it's rather having the throttle jammed open. The brickyard gave us those wonderful bricks too from the original track, which we laid into the start line. So now when you sit on the start line at the Festival of Speed, you're actually sitting there in front of the bricks from the original brickyard. So a great connection, and we love the relationship with Indy and the race, and of course the museum. Ken's become a well, a good friend and a great star of the festival. He always comes into the large library here whenever I'm in there, and he just jumps on the sofa. It's become a kind of Ken thing. He has to sort of jump on the sofa, which doesn't do it much good, and then lie down on it. So if I was being interviewed Ken style here, I'm sure I'd be lying down. And I guess Ken was one of the first people that came to Goodwood with a full TV. You know, he had his full crew with him all the time. He's followed around by a full TV crew for everything that he's doing, everything that's going on for him over the weekend. And I had a great run up with him. I've done it a few times with Ken, actually, I think. But the last time, he was a weeny bit embarrassed. He had a bit of a heavy night, I think, the night before, which he admitted in the end. And he actually lost it. He did a lot of donuts outside the house, and then slightly, a lot was spinning around. We got it slightly wrong. It ended up sort of in the bales. And much to Ken's horror, he had to actually use reverse to get out, which I think for Ken, that's not. He wasn't over impressed with himself at that point. We had the rest of the run. He put all that behind him and gave it full whack. He's become a big feature of the festival, and obviously fantastic to watch, and even more exciting to drive up with. Mad Mike first came in 2014, and it was a big moment in a way, because to have a real drifter like Mike just seemed to appear from New Zealand in that extraordinary Mazda which he built himself.
I mean, I was hyped to be the first, you know, with being with Red Bull, and they love to do stuff that's a little different and outside the box. So they brought, that year they had Sebastian Loeb in his Pikes Peak world record Peugeot. They had Patrick in the NASCAR doing big burnouts, and they decided to get myself up to drift up the hill to be the first person to ever drift up the driveway, which was really, really tricky. One being very fast and it's very narrow.
It's an interesting piece of kit. I've been in it with him a couple of times, and it's amazing what he can do in that car. He's spectacular. The crowd love it, and it is a great ride. I mean, it's an unbelievable run up the hill. It's certainly one of the highlights of my first 25 years for me.
It was probably the trickiest run I've ever had to do up the hill. It was probably the slowest, but it just started to rain right before our run. So from the outside, it looks like a lot more slow motion. However, inside the cockpit, it's a lot crazier. So, yeah, it was, you know, I'd say nerve-wracking, but as soon as the checkered flag, you know, or the start light goes green, and you get that, you're off the start, it's all the nerves just instantly go, and your foot's down, and it's just hang on, and to glance over and see the smiles, and then, you know, just rip all the way up to the top. It was cool again, like I say, just giving a different demographic a chance to experience our sport of drifting.
And of course, he took Monty, our butler here, at Goodwood on a famous run around this stage, actually, because I wouldn't do it, so I thought Monty would be much better. And that turned out to be a good decision, and it's become a bit of a classic video. And Monty's language leaves a bit to be desired, but it was, and Monty and Mike, I think, have struck up a good friendship.
Now we're approaching the gas arena, where we'll see some of the best two-wheel athletes in the world! Mike!
put him in the passenger seat and rip around was just really cool for him to experience all the different areas of Goodwood Festival of Speed. It was great for the fan and the viewer, or maybe someone who's coming along to the event. They could sort of see all the different, like from the rally stage, the hill climb, the gas arena and the freestyle motocross. It was cool to see the video afterwards and see his impression and his excitement. So last year we brought up the World Championship car, the little MX-5, which is really short. It's 1200 horsepower, 4-rotor twin turbo, so it's really crazy. But with the driveway at Festival of Speed, it's very narrow with you know, not super sharp corners, so it's very fast. It's actually a really tricky hill climb to get up, but I mean, it's awesome for the fans. It's really high speed. And there's lots of good viewing points from the bottom all the way to the top. Even when we're doing the warm-up burnouts, there's always, you know, a full house of people yelling and screaming. Even the older demographic now are right into it. So it's cool to see all the different genres of motorsport now respect drifting. This will be my 5th year up there. So it's been huge for me to get these invites to keep coming back. But yeah, just, I mean, for me to be able to come up there and represent drifting in our sport to a different demographic, it really was an epic opportunity.
We were so lucky in 2015 because the MotoGP race was still at Essen, and they ran on Saturday, not Sunday. So we had a sort of major push to try and get the riders to come, and some of the teams were a couple of the teams were really helpful, and everyone worked together. And we hired a plane in the end and said, look, any of you come, jump on the plane and we'll just bring you over. We'll have a big party, because they were all going to fly in after the race on Saturday evening. And brilliantly, Valentino came. I remember it really well. He arrived at the front door in the middle of the party and of course he won the race, which was just spectacular. So he'd come back in absolute spectacular style, won the race. He was over the moon. He arrived, this must have been 10 o'clock in the evening, middle of the party. He was in shorts and a sort of t-shirt, and his hair was, you know, like it is. You're looking brilliant. And I said, look, don't worry about changing it. You don't need to change for dinner, because hey, just come and have dinner. And well, he said, no, I have to change. It was just so sweet. So he was whipped upstairs, put his dinner jacket on, came down, and I presumed he would, you know, sort of disappear after dinner or something, but not a bit of it. No, he stayed for the show, and then he listened to all the music. I said, do you want to go to bed now, Valentino? Oh, no, I mean, I love it. It's beautiful. I love it here. It's the most, I love everything here. And he was just so enthusiastic, and he was like a boy, really, so excited about it all. And he absolutely got it. It was, and of course I guess that's just what he's like. And the crowd went, I think of all the moments we've had with the crowd at Goodwood and the crowd being caught up in the moment, we've had a couple of them, but that was one of the absolute big ones.
And I did this big build-up, and I always end up doing a backbend when he walked out. Valentino came out laughing his head off. He had an absolute blast. We had a great chat. The audience was so receptive. The atmosphere was fizzing. It was so exciting. He loved it, and I think he was really surprised at how many people were there. It was just one of those great days, and for me, it was a memory that I will never, ever forget.
It was inspired. Somebody dished out a load of yellow flags, and to see them all being waved around the turning circle, and him turning and then riding his bike through the house, which he loved. He's sweet, and they said to me, you must come to Silverstone, see me in the British Grand Prix. I want to show you my garage, my wife and my children. And actually we got him to stay, so he cancelled all his flights. I don't know what time he left in the end, but I think we got up the hill at least 3 or 4 times, driving different cars. And that's just what was so charming, is none of it was, you know, he was so humble and enthusiastic and caught up in it all, that every suggestion was like, oh, I must do this, yes, that sounds fantastic. It was, oh God, okay, I've done it all before, I need to go home. He was absolutely up for anything, and had a wonderful time. We'd love to have him back. The problem is the MotoGP race always clashes with. But we've been in touch with him quite a bit since, and you know, I very much hope that due course he'll be back. Rallying's always been a huge part of the event for all of us. Hannah Mickler obviously built us this fabulous rally stage in the forest, 2/3 of the way up the hill, and in '99 we had Colin McRae and Richard Burns here together. It was certainly one of the highlights, and I think that David Richards would say that this was a breakthrough for Richard. This was the moment he really sort of came out of himself. He was purposely put head to head with Colin up the hill, and he beat him. And suddenly he found that he could do it, and he went on, of course, to become world champion immediately after that, I think the next season.
The
year that both Colin and Richard came to the festival was quite interesting, because in typical Richard fashion, he said, if I'm going to the festival, I'm going to make sure that I go and I win. Colin, in typical Colin fashion, I think, said, I'm going to go to the festival and go sideways all over the place and have fun and enjoy myself. So Richard and Subaru pitched up with a car that was, you know, on the weight limit, a lower, or sort of down to minimum ride height, as it were, proper tarmac suspension. They'd actually been to Myra and run the car and tried various things that they thought would work at Goodwood, whereas Colin basically came with a Focus that was set up for, I don't know, gravel probably. There was a lot of running about as one team tried to outdo the other. So I think it was fairly typical of what went on in those times. You know, it was all in good banter, as it were. But you know, both drivers just wanting to make sure that they had the psychological upper hand.
To have them roaring up the tarmac and then sort of smashing their way onto the rally stage and doing that as one sort of big stage was a great thing to see, and certainly they were some of the superstars of rallying we've had here, and it was great to have them. And of course they're missed. We missed them all hugely.
Suddenly, you know, there wasn't, you know, one British driver, there was two there, and then, I mean, they got the press made up stories about they hated each other, and they were battling all the time with each other, nobody else. But I mean, that wasn't really true at the time.
Everybody just seemed to love that era of World Rally, and the fact that, you know, two Brits fighting it out, slugging it out over event after event at the top of the sport was great for the profile.
Richard was a quick driver, but he was a championship driver. I mean, when Richard won the World Championship, I don't think he won a rally that year, but he was a thinker. He was more a thinker of the future, of the long term. He was thinking a year ahead. You know, he was. Whereas Colin was thinking rally ahead and wanted to win, you know, he wanted to win all the rallies basically. But Richard was quick enough to be up there with them, but then if he saw things were getting a bit too quick, or he felt that it was getting beyond what he thought was safe, then he would just back off and grab the points, and that's what won him the championship. You know, so you've got to take your hat off to him there as well.
Richard actually took me in the forest. I went down to Wales to see him tyre testing, and he took me through the forest in the Subaru, and I got to say it was the best experience in terms of car control that I've ever had. He was chatting away to me, saying, "Oh, don't look so worried, you look very worried," and literally put his sort of tapped my knee, and his feet were doing this, and we were like, whoa. And actually the back end was round here. I couldn't. Your sense of direction just goes completely. You can't work out which way you're going, where you're going, and he only had one hand on the wheel. He was only at kind of 70%. It was an amazing display of talent. One of my most memorable moments of any Festival of Speed was in 2003 when I came out of the door of the dining room here at Goodwood. We've got these big sort of French windows that open up. I came out of the dining room early on Friday morning, must have been about 7:45 or something, just girding myself up for the beginning of the event, and this guy just ran straight into me, just knocked me absolutely flat. He said, "Oh, gee, man, I'm so sorry, man. I'm really sorry. I've just got to see the chaparrals." And I said, "God, it's great you're here. Where have you come from?" "I come all the way from Chicago," he said. And I thought that just epitomised the whole thing. So the chaparrals had never been seen in America, heaven knows how long, and this guy come all the way from Chicago to see them here at Goodwood. So we were really thrilled when Jim Hall said he was coming, and it took a while to persuade him, and he came, he and his wife came. I have his Stetson actually still in my office.
Great delight to see our event host, Lord March, at the wheel of the 66 car.
We had the 2E, which was the first car with a proper wing on it, well, with a big variable wing on it, which of course Phil Hill made so famous later on with the 2F. Noisiest car I've ever driven. So it was a big moment, big moment to have the white cars here, and it still is. We long to have them every year, and occasionally we get them. They're all in a museum now, rather harder to get, but at that point they were just sitting in a shed on the Rattlesnake Raceway in Midland, Texas, which is where Jim just had them all stored. I've been lucky, I guess, over the years, and I've had some fantastic, I've had some fantastic drives. I've also had some equally fantastic, though maybe not such cherished moments where I've been driven and had rides up the hill with various people. Sometimes I've had to do them. I've gone, do I really want to do this? And I've had some pretty extraordinary, I guess, and very fortunate moments of driving with some of the greatest drivers in the world. One of those was Stig Blomqvist, for sure. Went up in the Audi Quattro. It might have even been the day, a special run up the hill the day before the Fest Speed or something. But it definitely wasn't a timed run or anything. And he was absolutely just giving it every... And the most exceptional thing, a memorable thing for me, and I hadn't really realised before, was just how they wring the necks of these cars. I mean, there is no forgiveness. This is just full-on, brutal, you know, flat accelerator, hard as fast as you can to the corner, brakes hard as you can, brakes on flat and hard. I mean, he was just so, I couldn't believe how aggressive he was with the car. And as a passenger, you were just kind of, okay, you know, it was really brutal. So that was a big eye-opener. Another one was with Philippe Mock, another eye-opener. Well, I nearly lost my eyes actually altogether. I was walking through the paddock and Philippe said, "Oh, Charlie, you must come with me sit in my chair." So I go, "What are you talking about?" He said, "No, you come, you lie down." So Philippe was on his Kawasaki, whatever it is. It had the world standing quarter-mile record or something at some point. And he was going up the hill in normal Philippe style with some sort of crazy helmet, sort of asterisk helmet on. And he had his girlfriend lying on the sidecar, because it wasn't a chair, it was just a panel, flat platform, and she was going up with him. And she said, "No, she goes, you get on, you come with me." So she took her gloves off and everything, gave me her gloves. I just had my normal kit on. I got on this thing very stupidly, and off we went. And of course, acceleration was absolutely mind-blowing. So all he said to me was, "You hang on, don't move. Don't try anything fancy. Sit still or lie still, just hold on." And it was the holding on that was the problem, because the acceleration was so massive. And certainly going up through, you know, coming out of Moulcombe, going up the hill was... And I was literally, my chin was this high off the ground. So I was thinking about trying to keep my legs up as well. I thought, God, my feet, it was a bit like, I've done the crest for a little bit, but it was a bit like, you know, keeping your feet down. And I thought, oh my God, okay, well, I just better not touch the floor. Anyway, we made it in one. Philippe and I become good friends since then. He's threatening to do it again this year, but I think maybe we might give that one a miss. I went on another good bike experience with Randy Mamela with the two-seater Ducati. Just an amazing skill. So I think that is a weird experience being on the back for sure, and I'm sure, you know, he's completely on top of it. But it feels pretty risky in the sense that because he's doing all his, you know, he's doing his wheelies and he's doing his stoppies, whatever they are, you know, where he puts the back up. So you're suddenly going, hits the brakes really hard, and the whole bike's going up in the air like that, pivoting on the front wheel, and you think, oh my God, we're going to go over the top. And I don't, because my daughter did it as well, actually.
I can't describe it. It was the most amazing thing I've ever done, and
I would love to just spend my life on the back of that bike.
It's interesting how he manages, because the weights are must be so different to the people he's got on the bike, that how he does it all and takes all that into consideration is interesting. I had a fun time once too with Mr. Toyota, Akio Toyota, obviously head of Toyota, been to the event a number of times, and he was very excited with the GT86. He wanted to take me up in that, and we had a really fun run up the hill in that. He's a very good driver and was very keen to show how quick and good the car was. So that was a good one. And Toyota obviously played a very big part in the event all the way, pretty much from the beginning. So I guess first of all, we were perhaps more focused on cars than drivers. We really wanted to bring together the world's greatest cars that people really hadn't ever seen or hadn't come together for so many years on that scale. So that was a big focus to start with, and of course at the same time completely aware that we needed also, the whole thing about Goodwood was trying to put the right car and the right driver back together again and relive that moment. So we wanted to see the driver in the right helmet, the right overalls, in the right car, that's what really started to develop. A driver who was way up on my list, all our lists, obviously from the very, very beginning, was Jackie Ickx. Jackie was always one of my absolute heroes, but I'd never met him. So to have him come to Goodwood was really important.
Yes, Jackie Ickx is here. Jackie, great to see you. I hope you're having a good weekend.
It's hard not having a good weekend in Goodwood, because it's the most magnificent place, I think, in the world about car racing, and such a weekend, it's really exceptional.
And of course, he was just such an unbelievably great all-round driver and winner, and also very unusual. And he came at driving in a very different way to most of his generation. Fantastic talent, loved by the teams he worked for, drove for, and hugely successful with Ferrari, hugely successful with Porsche at Le Mans, 6 times winner. So many years the world's greatest Le Mans driver, and of course Paris-Dakar just to add to it as well. So pleased when he eventually came. We had a big drama. He got left at the airport. We couldn't find him. He then rang and said, I'm here. And my God, after all this time he's here, and we've lost him. So we then sent a helicopter to pick him up, and it was all a big drama. It all calmed right down. He had a fabulous weekend. He drove the Gulf Mirage with Derek. They went up the hill together, and it was obviously a huge celebration. He's been a very big part of Festival Speed actually, and Revival. But mostly Festival Speed ever since. It's great for me the way, obviously from the festival, we developed so many new and lasting and great relationships, and Jackie's absolutely, one of those.
It's right to say that during my career I had the chance to drive a number of very good cars, very good team, very well prepared always. And it's true to say that I'm not the only one in this case this weekend, but we are all returning to some of the cars we drove in the past, and that Porsche was one of them, totally exceptional, winning Le Mans, and it's a great luck, a great privilege to have the chance to drive the car and to do it in such beautiful condition as we're having in Goodwood, surrounded by rails, fans and racing enthusiasts. And I think really what Lord March did is unique.
Cartier have been a fantastic supporter of the Festival of Speed. In fact, they've been involved in the event for over 20 years. And they really fit perfectly everything we were trying to do with creating a concours event at the festival, which we always felt from the very beginning would be a very important addition to the overall weekend. Their whole attitude towards beauty, design, luxury was exactly what we wanted to create and develop for the sort of meaning behind a concours event. We wanted to put on an event which was all about the beauty of the cars, the pure design, and really all about how they looked and how they made you feel. And in that sense, we've had some fairly alternative judges. We've had judges that aren't necessarily that great, they're not enormous experts necessarily when it comes to the sort of historic detail around certain cars, but they absolutely understand design. And we've had some wonderful cars, and it's always a thrilling part of the weekend for me to see those cars actually turn up and sit on that famous lawn.
We're here on the Cartier Style Lux lawn, where all of the magic takes place during the Festival of Speed. Cartier essentially is the a concours d'elegance as a key part of the Goodwood Festival of Speed.
We've had such support from people like David Sidoric, all his wonderful Zagatos, Peter Mullen, both of them from Los Angeles. Peter Mullen's wonderful teardrop Ferrari and Flashy cars, all those Talbot Lagos we had a few years ago all together, and of course things like the back cars and lots of other extraordinary things. And the A6 GCS Maserati is one of my all-time favourite, absolute favourite sports cars, and we've had that not so long ago either. So for me, I mean, the way cars look and feel is a huge part of the whole excitement and enthusiasm around them, and Cartier and the Style Lux play a very big part in that, and they brings a huge amount, I think, to the weekend. And it's a great thing to have sitting alongside the racing cars and all that noise and fury, to have this sort of quieter place where you can go and just enjoy the cars for their absolute design quality and their beauty.
It's really grown from a handful of great car collectors and collectors sort of chums to growing the community with these, say, these exceptional cars that you'll really only ever see once, and more, 9 times out of 10 you'll only ever see once here at Goodwood on the Cartier lawn.